Okay, y'all, so I'm gonna make 2 more videos. They might be long, but this series, it'll be 14 videos, and then I'll have a reflection video. So I left off saying that I told Marcus, hey, call the cops to meet us there because, I didn't want to be there with him alone. And Marcus arrived back to the place. I knew he had been there, his shirt was off. He had taken his shirt off and just left it on the back porch. But by the time I got there, he wasn't there. He had gone to the store, he later told me. And I left, and when I returned, I saw that he was just in the house. The light was on. And I asked him how he had gotten in because I had changed the locks. And he stated that the leasing office had let him in, which was a lie. They would not have done that. He had actually climbed through the window. So I was afraid to be there along with Marcus, so I just stayed outside in the backyard and I called the cops. And they ended up arresting him since he was violating a TPO. I didn't know he was going to get arrested, and I let the cops know that it wasn't my intention that he got arrested. But they stated that, hey, that's what happens when someone violates a TPO. The cops made me nervous because they were saying that Marcus could be bailed out of jail within the next 4 hours. And there was this guy, let's just call him, Chris, okay? And Chris was someone I had met at the last job I had worked. And I would message him every now and then. I don't know. I thought it was innocent. I don't know. I was kind of naive. So yeah, I would message him. When I was dating Marcus, I would message Chris, every now and then, and it'd just be small talk. And I didn't think anything of the messages. I just thought it was innocent, and I just thought Chris was a friend. Although, as I took some time to look back over things, I should have seen that, he may have been interested. And also there was like a moment when I just invited him to just come chill with Marcus and I at our house and watch movies, and he declined. So I was talking to Chris after Marcus got arrested, and Chris said that I sounded frightened, and I told him that I was, but that I was fine. And he stated that he could come over, and I told him that I was fine, that I didn't need him to. And he asked again, and I declined again. And on the 3rd time, he was just like, are you sure? So I just relented, and I told him that he could come over. I was just, still at a point of putting other people's desires before my own. But let me tell you, having that man over was a mistake. It was a really poor choice. And even as I was texting him my address, I felt like I shouldn't have been doing that. And I don't know, shortly after I sent him my address, I was like, maybe I should tell him not to come over. But then I was like, well, actually, that would be rude because he's already on the way. That would not have been rude. So he arrived, and I just let him into my bedroom because the living room was a mess. That was another mistake. So we just sat on the bed. Well, actually, we laid on the bed. And he just turned the TV on, and I wasn't paying attention to it because, I was just really concerned about Marcus. I was just concerned about Marcus just sitting in jail, being uncomfortable. I was just concerned about Marcus just sitting in a cold jail cell, and I never wanted that for him. I just wanted to get away from him. And I was just laying there with Chris, and he was just planting kisses on my head and forehead, and I didn't want that at all. I remember I was just like, I wasn't feeling comfortable with him laying there, and I was just kind of covering my face. I was just kind of covering my face with my arm because there was a lack of closeness. And I recall him asking, is there a reason you're covering your face? And I just told him, no, I'm just laying here. But as I recall this, it just reminds me of when I was married to that guy. Sometimes I would just cover my face with him because I wasn't comfortable with him. There was a lack of closeness there as well. So y'all, I've been reading a little bit about fight or flight. And I've read that, when you're faced with like either a threat or just something really uncomfortable, like an uncomfortable, a highly uncomfortable memory, or just, overwhelming thoughts, overwhelming emotions, you're going to either fight or you're going to try to flee. And sometimes when you're in flight mode, you have healthy methods of fleeing, such as, working out, praying, things that aren't going to harm you. But some methods of fleeing are unhealthy, like drugs or alcohol or sex. So ever since I was like 12, whenever I'd be like faced with overwhelming emotions, overwhelming thoughts, I just enter flight mode. But for me, they would just be sexual thoughts and masturbation. So I was just used to like sexual activity to help relieve whatever feeling I was feeling, to help relieve whatever emotional feeling I was having. So that was a flight response for me. And I think it showed itself in that moment as well. I was just, overwhelmed thinking about Marcus. I was sad. I really wanted Marcus there with me in bed. I didn't want to be laying there with Chris. I wanted Marcus in bed with me and out of that jail. I know it sounds weird since I had called the cops on him to make him leave and to turn around and want him there just a little while later. But I kind of entered flight mode in that moment, and I just remember putting his hand on my breast. And I don't know what came over that man in that moment, but he just pulled my underwear down and he just put his mouth down there. And I didn't want that. I don't know, I kind of just struggled to speak up and I just felt very disgusted. I just remember telling him, you don't have to do that. But he kept going. Then I just told him, I don't want you to. Then he stopped and he reached for his wallet and he pulled out a condom. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do anything. I'm sorry, but will you just go? So he left. And I just lay in bed missing Marcus and thinking, man, now I need to take an STD test. But I don't recall how the conversations, how the interactions with this man continued. I just recall being on the phone with him one day and him telling me that my neighbor Fred, spoke with him. So Fred is someone we worked with, at the job that we had shared. And, Fred was my neighbor. So Chris said that Fred said that I saw your car outside of Ashley's house. And Chris told him nothing happened. I was just checking on her. He was doing much more than checking on me. He had some motives. Chris said that he cared about my reputation. Well, as I reflect on things, I'm thinking to myself, that guy did not care about my reputation. If he did, he would not have come to my home so late at night. Then Chris told me that Fred was telling people at work that he saw Chris had come over to my home. And I'm thinking, man, he's entertained by this. He must be so nosy. And then Chris was like, he may be, but again, I'm just trying to look out for your reputation. Don't tell him I told you this. Don't tell him I shared this. Don't tell him I shared this with you. And again, as I look over things, I'm like, why couldn't I have talked about this with Fred? Why couldn't I have said, Fred, are you telling people that Chris came to my home? But I think that, I don't know. I don't know if Chris was just making up things, if he was just claiming Fred was telling people that he came over, or if he was the one telling folks that. But I still loved Marcus and wanted to spend time with him. He wasn't trying to talk to me. He was saying that he needed his space. And I didn't have anybody to hang out with. I was just lonely, so I just hung out with Chris. But the more time I spent with him, the more interested in him I became. I thought that Chris was a mature person, from just the language he'd use and the way he'd respond to me. I was attracted to the maturity that I thought he had. But every time he'd come over, we'd just watch like superhero shows and play video games. And I'm like, I liked the show that we watched, but I would just get tired of it because we would just always watch that show. But I knew I didn't want to be with him. I didn't know how to turn him down though. Like when he'd say things like, if I was your man, like he would say that often and I wouldn't really reply. I do remember once him saying that he was willing to have one more kid, and I'd be like, well, I just want to have 4 more, like at least 4 more, because I wanted to just let him know, hey, we aren't really compatible. But again, I didn't want to be like, well, I'm not interested in just, you know, being with you. But I didn't want to let him know, like, hey, I just don't want to get serious. All right, y'all. So let's talk about when I ended up sleeping with Chris. He was the 6th guy I've ever slept with, and I haven't been with anyone since. I feel like even when like I meet God's best, you know, we're gonna wait because I'm just like stronger. At this point, I have been spending time with Chris for 3 weeks, and I still just wanted to talk to Marcus. I still wanted Marcus. And again, you know, Marcus was just like, actually, everything's fresh for me. We were gonna make house rules, but you ended up putting me out that same night. So he wanted his space, but I didn't want to give him his space. There was a particular day when I was going to take my brother's kids out for my niece's birthday. And I told Marcus to let me know if he wanted to come along, but he didn't text back. And Chris stated that he was taking the day off work and to let me know if I wanted him to come over. I told him that, hey, I'm taking my brother's kids out, but I'll let you know when I'm done with them. You know, sometimes I would say like sexual things to Chris. That's the flesh. But you can't play with fire. So I had a fun time with my nieces and nephew, racked up unnecessary credit card debt, and then went home. Then the deed happened. Chris came over and the deed happened. At this point, I was comfortable with him. I remember telling him, hey, you can stay as long as you like. But he left and he, you know, returned home to his son, which was a good thing. So I fell asleep and I woke around 1 a.m. to Marcus calling me. He said that he had went to a club and he had gotten stranded and he wanted me to pick him up. I would have, but I didn't feel peace about it. There was this strong feeling I had that something bad was going to happen if I went and got him. So I didn't. I told him I didn't feel peace about going out. And he just kept on calling me back to back until I turned my phone off. The next morning, you know, I called him to check on him, but he had blocked me. But he and I started hanging out again. I called him one day and he stated, oh, I'm just at this restaurant. He was at a restaurant that we would frequent. He said that his phone was dying, but that I could just go there if I wanted to see him. And later on, he said that he felt like it was God, the fact that I was calling him just as his phone was about to die. And that we were able to just see each other and meet up. So he got in my car and I was like, I'm sorry that I didn't give you a chance. I should have given you a chance to show that, you know, you were going to follow the house rules. Then he began crying and saying that all he wanted was an apology. And I just asked him if he wanted to come over and he said yes. So he was back and I was happy. Well, all I can say is I just regret every moment I spent with Chris, every fruitless moment that made that time of my life harder than it needed to be, harder than it already was. I remember he called me up, you know, and said that he hadn't heard from me in a couple days, and he asked if Marcus was back and if I'd been sleeping with him, and I told him yes. And I told Marcus that I had hung with Chris while he was away. And Marcus asked if I had slept with him. He asked it in a lighthearted way, you know, with a smile on his face. And I just told him yes, because I didn't think he would care. There was a time before when we were broken up when I had kidded about, you know, seeing someone, and he really didn't care. So I thought that he wouldn't care, you know, regarding this as well, but he did. So after Marcus had gotten out of jail, he had found a shed to stay in, and he had met a girl while he was, you know, out of our home and staying in the shed. He said her name was Amber, which is a very pretty name. And I was still looking through his phone, and I saw that he had exchanged messages with her saying that, well, I'm not even gonna say it. I'm just gonna put it on the screen. And I asked him if he wanted to sleep with her, and he stated that, you know, they weren't seeing each other, but that she was pretty, and every man wanted to sleep with a pretty girl. I texted Chris that I was working on my friendship with Marcus. I used the word friendship even though I meant more. So I would have my brother's kids a lot. And I remember there was a day in October when the kids and I were just waiting for Marcus to get off work. We were just gonna, pick him up, take him home. And Chris called me while I was sitting at Marcus's job waiting for him to clock out. And I remember just saying out loud, man, I really don't want to talk to this guy. I only wanted Marcus. So Chris called and I remember telling him, hey, I'm just waiting for Marcus to get off work. I'm taking my brother's kids to a fall festival. I want to see if Marcus wants to accompany me there. If not, just gonna take him home. And then my little niece, Chloe asks a lot of questions, which is okay. She asked me who I was talking to on the phone. I was like, well, someone who I've hung out with a couple times before, but I don't really want to talk to anymore because I think he's interested in me, but I just want Marcus. But Marcus didn't go to the fall festival with us. I just took him home, but he did ride with me to take my nieces and nephew back home. And while we were in the car on the way to their home, Chris called and I quickly ignored the call. But Marcus saw and called him back. Chris hung up on him and Marcus called him back again. And Chris told him that whatever he had did with me was none of Marcus's business. And I was just like, well, babe, I'm sorry that he called. And the next day, Marcus just got my phone and he just took a picture of Chris's number. And he and I argued that night. He had been drinking and he was scary when he wasn't sober. So I just slept in the car that night. So I just slept in the car right outside our apartment. And I locked the car doors and I remember waking up in the middle of the night and just seeing him in front of my car talking with someone on the phone. And it turned out he was talking with Chris. And I told Marcus that I felt bad about ghosting Chris, which is why I hadn't done so. And that I also felt like I had a soul tie with him due to the sex. Marcus wanted me to change my number, but I did not immediately do so. So Marcus would just continue to be upset with me about just often bring it up. And he would just constantly check my phone. And he said something that I'm not going to say. I'll just post it on the screen. And again, we would just continue to argue. I would just take him back and forth between, the shed that he would stay in our apartment. He would just be like, oh, I just want to leave and do my own thing. And I'll just post on the screen some of the things he said during our arguments. Sometimes he would do things and blame it on his ADHD. Like when we were in Atlanta and we were visiting Lenox Mall, he was expecting to see a lot of pretty girls, but he wasn't. Now, if he was expecting to see pretty girls, he could have kept that to himself. But he kept just verbalizing the fact that he wasn't seeing many pretty girls because rap songs that he had listened to stated that there were lots of pretty girls at Lenox Mall. So he was expecting to see lots of pretty girls at Lenox Mall. So yeah, he didn't have to share that with me. Walking with me through the mall and sharing with me the fact that he wasn't seeing many pretty women. That's something that did not need to be shared. Yeah, we would just visit different churches, just trying to find where we belonged. And there was this one church we visited. We were just sitting there during Bible study, and he saw a pill on the floor. So whatever letter was on the pill, he just looked it up, and it turned out that it was a Xanax pill. And he picked up the pill, and he was going to keep it. He was going to keep that pill, but I just took it from him, and I just threw it back on the floor, and I just kicked it aside. He was going to take that random strange pill and try to get high. So y'all, during some of our arguments, I would just find myself putting a chair behind my bedroom door or just locking myself in the bathroom with a chair behind the bathroom door. I recall one night he was just stabbing at my bedroom door with a knife, and I just waited for him to cool down. And then I just asked him if he was ready to just come to bed. I think it was just a very unhealthy relationship. He was unhealthy. I was unhealthy. He was more unhealthy. And I think it's always easy to say that the other person was more unhealthy, but he certainly was. I recall just one day telling him, afraid for my life when it comes to you. I'm afraid that you might kill me. And he was like, well, Ashley, I'm always afraid that you might just put me out. Like those were two equal things. So one night when he was drunk and we were arguing, I remember him saying that he has a lot of girls and they all have straight hair. And the next morning he brought it up and he laughed about it. He was like, why did I say that? Ha ha ha. So I'm just like, him remembering that he said that just, makes me think that he was aware of some of his actions when he was not sober. He may have even been aware of what he said about some kids dying young. I remember I asked him to write a song about me, a rap. And let me tell you, he did much later, after we were broken up. And it was a really threatening rap. And I am going to share a clip of it. It's going to be about, I don't know, maybe 20 seconds, the clip is. And in it, he's just, well, in the song, he's just saying, he's just threatening me and anyone I may be with, and saying if he knew voodoo, he'd use it on me. And also in it, he's calling me a hypocritical Christian because Christians are supposed to not have sex before marriage, but I was sleeping with him. So that's the hypocrisy he was speaking on, even though sex before marriage was something he was encouraging. So that's just one of the ways the enemy works. He'll encourage you to do things, but then he'll just turn around and accuse you. At the start of our relationship, I remember telling him that, that I was afraid to lose him. But later on, as things progressed, as things worsened, I remember telling him that, I was no longer afraid to lose him. And his facial expression kind of changed. I don't know, he looked a little taken aback. He was far from pleased to hear that.